The ballroom was a sea of sharks, and Elara Vance was bleeding. They saw her simple dress, her quiet demeanor, and they laughed. They called her the professor's mousy wife, a drab sparrow among peacocks. Led by the cruel Serafina, the city's elite decided she was nothing. They relished in her humiliation at the grand gala, unaware they were mocking the wealthiest woman in the room. They thought they knew her. They were about to learn how devastatingly wrong they were, one 8-figure donation at a time. The city slid past the window of the town car, a river of diamonds and topaz against the black velvet of the November night. Arthur Vance glanced at his wife, his hand finding hers on the worn leather seat. "Are you sure you're all right, Elara?" He murmured, his voice a familiar, warm comfort. Elara Vance turned from the window. Her reflection was a pale ghost against the glittering skyline of New York City. She was, as always, a study in understatement, while the other women descending on the Grand Astoria ballroom would be encased in the latest confections from Chanel or Dior. Elara wore a vintage Givenchy. It was a simple floor-length sheath of slate-grey silk, a color that perfectly matched her eyes. Her only jewelry was her thin platinum wedding band and a pair of simple pearl earrings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon, a style that highlighted the delicate, intelligent bones of her face. "I'm fine, Arthur," she said, her voice as quiet as her dress. "It's just, loud, even from in here." "It's the Vanguard Gala." Arthur sighed, straightening his own respectable, if not show-stopping tuxedo. "It's the annual peacock mating ritual. We'll make our donation to the Global Children's Relief Fund. You'll admire the architecture, I'll avoid the philosophy department head, and we'll be home by 11. A perfect evening." Elara smiled, a small, genuine curving of her lips that Arthur cherished. "A perfect evening," she agreed. The car stopped. The illusion of peace shattered. A doorman, dripping in gold braid, pulled the door open, and the noise hit them. A wall of sound, composed of camera clicks, shouted names, and the high-pitched, brittle laughter of the city's elite. Arthur stepped out first, a solid, reassuring presence. He turned and offered Elara his hand. As she stepped onto the red carpet, a sudden, blinding series of flashes erupted. Elara flinched, her hand tightening on Arthur's. "It's all right," he soothed. "They're not for us." He was right. The paparazzi were screaming a name, but it wasn't Vance. "Serafina over here." "Serafina. Who are you wearing?" A blood-red Lamborghini had pulled up behind them, and from it emerged Serafina Dubois Huxley. She was not a woman. She was an event. Her dress was a chaotic masterpiece of red feathers and sequins by Balenciaga, and a necklace of truly obscene diamonds on loan from Harry Winston, as the society pages would dutifully report tomorrow, was draped around her throat. Her laughter was loud and abrasive as she kissed the air on either side of an entertainment reporter's head. "She's vibrant," Arthur noted, steering Elara toward the entrance. "She's a distraction," Elara murmured, her eyes already scanning the crowd, cataloguing, observing. They slipped inside, past the phalanx of photographers, their arrival as unnoticed as a single falling snowflake in a blizzard. The Grand Astoria ballroom was a cavern of gilded excess. Ceilings vaulted 3 stories high, painted with cherubs and clouds. Chandeliers the size of carriages dripped crystal light over a sea of people who collectively controlled a significant portion of the world's wealth. And they were all looking at each other. "Professor Vance, Arthur, glad you could make it." A man with a booming voice. Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer, with a predatory grin, clapped Arthur on the back. His eyes slid over Elara, dismissed her, and returned to Arthur. "Good of you to support the cause." "We wouldn't miss it, Marcus," Arthur said smoothly, his hand resting on the small of Elara's back. "You know my wife, Elara." "Ah, yes." Marcus Thorne gave her a cursory nod, his gaze already scanning the room for a more important target. "Mrs. Vance. Lovely. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see a Rockefeller." He was gone, swallowed by the crowd. "Charming," Elara said, her voice dry. "He's a Philistine," Arthur said, leading her toward the champagne table. "But a necessary one, I'm told." They hadn't taken 5 steps before they were intercepted. Seraphina Dubois Huxley had finally made her entrance, and she moved through the crowd. Not like a person, but like a force of nature, a hurricane of feathers and entitlement, with her 2 loyal sycophants, Beatrice Bea Croft and the same Marcus Thorne, trailing in her wake. Seraphina's eyes, sharp and calculating, landed on Arthur. "Arthur, darling," she boomed, holding out a hand glittering with rings. "How wonderful to see you. I so adored your last paper on pre-Columbian monetary systems. Utterly fascinating." "Seraphina," Arthur said, his smile tight as he dutifully brushed his lips over her knuckles. "You're too kind." "I am never too kind. Darling, I am always just right," she purred. And then her gaze fell on Elara. It was not a kind gaze. It was the look a biologist gives a new, uninteresting specimen under a microscope. Her eyes traveled from Elara's simple hair down to the hem of her slate-grey dress. A slow, condescending smile spread across her perfectly painted red lips. "And you brought her?" Seraphina said, not to Elara, but to Arthur. The her hung in the air, heavy and dismissive. Elara stood perfectly still. She didn't shrink. She didn't blush. She simply watched. "This is my wife, Elara Vance," Arthur said, his voice losing its warmth, turning to steel. "Oh, I know." Seraphina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The quiet one. Arthur, really, we must find you a new tailor. And as for your wife, darling," she finally addressed Elara, her voice dropping into a tone of false syrupy concern. "Did you lose a bet that dress? It's so functional. I suppose someone has to be the drab little sparrow in a room full of peacocks. It's so brave of you." "Isn't it brave, Bea?" Bea Croft, a woman who had surgically altered herself to look perpetually surprised, tittered on command. "So brave, Seraphina, utterly courageous." Elara merely tilted her head. "Good evening, Miss Dubois Huxley. It's a lovely party. The floral arrangements are particularly stunning." The non-reaction, the simple polite observation, seemed to infuriate Seraphina more than any witty retort could have. Seraphina was used to people cowering or fighting back. She didn't know what to do with quiet indifference. "Yes, well," Seraphina snapped, her smile faltering. "Enjoy the canapés. I'm sure they're more to your speed." She turned on her feathered heel and swept away her clique, following dutifully. Arthur let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "I am so sorry, my love. That woman is vile." Elara watched Seraphina's red-feathered retreat. "She's not vile, Arthur," she said, softly, taking a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. "She's just terrified." "Terrified?" Arthur was baffled. "Of what? She owns half the building." Elara took a small, deliberate sip. Her grey eyes were clear and deep. "She's terrified that one day Everyone will look at her, really look at her, and see the same thing she sees in the mirror every morning." "And what's that?" "Nothing at all," Elara said. "Now I believe you promised me a look at that architecture." As they walked away, a few people who had overheard the exchange snickered. The story was already solidifying. Arthur Vance, the charming middleweight academic, was shackled to a mousy, socially inept wife who dressed in hand-me-downs. The first laugh had been cast. The gala settled into its rhythm, a symphony of performative generosity and barely concealed contempt. Elara and Arthur tried to stick to their plan. They examined the gilded cornices, and Elara, who had a mind that processed numbers and patterns with terrifying speed, mentally calculated the structural load of the central chandelier. Arthur pointed out the historical inaccuracies in the Renaissance-style murals, and she squeezed his arm affectionately. They were a small, quiet island in a churning, tempestuous sea, and the sharks were circling. The humiliation was not a single grand event. It was a death by 1,000 tiny, paper-thin cuts. It started with the servers. Elara, thirsty, tried to flag down a waiter carrying a tray of sparkling water. He looked through her, his eyes fixed on a louder, more demanding guest just behind her. Arthur finally had to put a firm hand on the man's arm. "My wife would like a water." The waiter, flustered, handed it over with a mumbled apology, but the message was clear. Elara, in her simple grey dress, was invisible. Then came the silent auction. The tables were laden with ostentatious prizes: a week on a private yacht, a bespoke sports car, a dinner with a fading movie star. Elara and Arthur browsed more out of curiosity than genuine interest. They paused by a beautiful signed first-edition set of Jane Austen. Arthur, a true romantic, sighed. "Now that is lovely." "Indeed," Elara said, a rare note of genuine interest in her voice. The bidding sheet showed a starting price of $5,000. The current high bid was $15,000, signed by S. Dubois Huxley. "Well, she has expensive if predictable taste," Arthur murmured. "Perhaps we should place a bid," Elara suggested, picking up the pen. Before her pen could touch the paper, a hand adorned with a 10-carat yellow diamond clamped down on her wrist. It was B. Croft Seraphina's chief lieutenant. "Oh, darling, no." B gushed, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You don't want to get into a bidding war with Seraphina. She always gets what she wants. And besides—" Her eyes flickered over Elara's dress. "Are you sure you can afford it? I hear a professor's salary doesn't quite stretch to this level of literature." Elara's eyes went cold. She didn't pull her hand away. She simply looked at B's hand on her wrist until the other woman felt the chill and awkwardly pulled it back. "Thank you for the advice, Miss Croft," Elara said, her voice perfectly level. She placed the pen back on the table, her desire for the books instantly extinguished. "It's always wise to know one's limits." "See smart, girl," B said, patting Elara's shoulder as if she were a child. "Now run along. Go get another water." Arthur, who had been momentarily distracted by a colleague, returned to see the tail end of the exchange. He saw the look on B's face and the rigid set of Elara's shoulders. "Is there a problem here?" Arthur's voice was dangerously quiet. "Oh, goodness no, Professor," B tittered. "We were just having a bit of girl talk, weren't we, Elara?" Elara just looked at her. "Come, Arthur," Elara said, taking his arm. "They're about to serve dinner. I'd like to find our table." But the worst was yet to come. As they navigated the crowded floor toward the dining area, Seraphina herself orchestrated the main event. She was holding court near the grand staircase, a flute of champagne in one hand, gesturing wildly as she told a story. Elara, trying to find the path of least resistance, attempted to slip by behind her. It was perhaps an accident. A loss of balance from the queen bee. Serafina stumbled backward, her arm swinging wide. Her full flute of champagne, pink sticky champagne, arced through the air and splashed directly down the front of Elara's slate-grey dress. A collective theatrical gasp went up from the circle around Serafina. The music seemed to dip. The chatter died. Elara stood frozen, the cold liquid soaking through the delicate silk, a large dark stain spreading across her chest. "Oh my God!" Serafina shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock. "Oh, you poor, poor thing! I am so clumsy!" She burst into that high, brittle laugh. But then again, she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried across the entire room. "Who could even tell? It's just grey. Perhaps I've done it an improvement. Added a little colour to your world, darling." Marcus Thorne and B. Croft howled with laughter. Others farther away just stared, caught between embarrassment and the cruel theatre of it all. Elara didn't say a word. She looked down at the stain, then up at Serafina's triumphant, smiling look. Arthur, his face a mask of thunder, was already shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket to cover her. "That's enough, Serafina." Arthur's voice was a low growl. "Enough, darling, it was an accident." Serafina scoffed. "Though really," she added, leaning in conspiratorially, "you should thank me. That dress was a tragedy. Now it's a statement." Elara put a hand on Arthur's chest, stopping him. She looked directly at Serafina. The ballroom held its breath, waiting for the mousy wife to cry, to scream, to run. Elara did none of those things. She simply reached up, took the sodden napkin offered by a panicked waiter, and began to dab very precisely at the stain. "It's quite all right, Ms. Dubois Huxley," Elara said, her voice clear in the sudden silence. "It's just a dress, and you're right. Accidents happen." She turned to her husband. "Please put your jacket back on, Arthur. You'll be cold. A little champagne won't hurt me." This was the ultimate insult. Elara's total, unassailable composure. She had taken Serafina's most potent venom and neutralized it with simple, quiet grace. Serafina's smile became a sneer. She had wanted tears, and Elara had given her poise. "Well, if you're going to be such a bore about it." Serafina spat. She snapped her fingers. "Waiter. Another bottle of the Dom. This one is empty." She tossed her empty flute onto the man's tray with a clatter. As she swept away, the crowd parted for her, but the whispers that followed were different. They weren't just about Elara's drab dress. They were about Serafina's brutal attack. Elara, by doing nothing, had suddenly subtly shifted the room's dynamic. She had become a victim, and Serafina a bully. Arthur wrapped his jacket around Elara's shoulders anyway, ignoring her protest. "That," he whispered, his lips near her ear, "is the last time. We're leaving." "No," Elara said, her voice surprisingly firm. The champagne had been cold, and it had acted like a splash of water to her face. The observation phase was over. "No, Arthur, we are not leaving. We are going to sit down at our table. We are going to eat our overcooked salmon. And we are going to make our donation." She looked up at him, and her grey eyes, usually so calm now, had a spark in them. A tiny burning ember. "I believe," she said, "it's time to show them what functional really looks like." They found their table. It was as they'd expected, in the Siberia of the ballroom near the kitchens, with a lovely view of a service corridor. They were seated with a junior city councilman, a retired opera singer, who had brought her cat in a jeweled carrier, and two distant cousins of the event's founder, who were arguing about an inheritance. Elara, now draped in Arthur's oversized tuxedo jacket, seemed perfectly content. She ate her salmon, complimented the cat, and listened politely as the councilman explained his plan for zoning reform. "She's handling this better than I am," Arthur muttered to himself, pushing his food around his plate. He was furious. He was a man of books and ideas, and this world of performative cruelty, this waste, it grated on his soul. But Elara, she was processing. From the main stage, the auctioneer, a man with a slick tuxedo and a voice that could charm a snake, kicked off the main event. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "we've had the silent auction, but now it's time for the real generosity to begin. Remember what we're here for. The children, the Global Children's Relief Fund." A slickly produced video played on the massive screens, showing smiling children in clinics and schools built by the fund. It was emotional, effective, and designed to open wallets. Elara watched, her face unreadable. Then the bidding began. "First up," the auctioneer shouted, "a private one-week stay at a villa in Tuscany, private chef included. Do I hear $50,000? A dozen hands flew up. Serafina Dubois Huxley bids $75,000, the auctioneer pointed. Marcus Thorne counters at $80,000. Serafina comes back at $100,000. Serafina was on her feet, a new glass of champagne in hand, blowing kisses. She won the villa for $120,000 to thunderous applause. Next up, a walk-on role in a new Marvel movie. Then a custom-designed experience with a celebrity chef. Serafina or one of her clique bid loudly and ostentatiously on every single item. They weren't just donating. They were conquering. They were buying their status in the room, one extravagant purchase at a time. Elara watched a small black notebook, one she always carried, appearing in her hand. She uncapped a simple black pen and began to write. Arthur, curious, leaned over. "What are you doing?" "Writing a review of the salmon." "I'm doing math," Elara whispered back, not looking up. "The villa has a market value of generously $40,000. She paid $120,000. That's an $80K charitable write-off. The walk-on role, valueless, but the cachet of bragging about it. She values that at $50,000. She's not buying items, Arthur. She's buying social capital, and she's getting it at a 3-to-1 premium." Arthur blinked. "You see all that?" "I see the numbers," Elara said. "The numbers never lie." The Master of Ceremonies. A genial TV host named David Chen finally retook the stage. "What an incredible auction. Thank you, Serafina Marcus Bear, for your stunning generosity. Tonight, from the auction alone, we have raised $2,500. The room erupted. Serafina stood and took a bow, as if she alone had written the check. "A truly amazing number." David continued his smile, never wavering. "But folks, our goal for the new pediatric wing is $5 million. We are only halfway there." The mood sobered slightly. "And now," David said, "we come to the part of the evening, the pledge drive, where we ask you to open your hearts. We're going to put the thermometer on the screen. Our associates are in the aisles. You can pledge by cash, by card, or by raising your paddle. Let's see if we can close this gap. Let's see if we can get to $5 million for the children." A massive screen behind him lit up, showing the current total, $2,500,000. The music swelled. The lights dimmed. Waiters moved through the tables, offering more wine, their other hand holding a tablet for donations. "Who will start us off?" David pleaded. "I will," Serafina shouted, her voice slurring slightly. She stood up again, weaving. "Put me down for another $250,000. The room exploded again. Serafina blew another kiss. The number on the screen jumped $2,750,000. "Thank you, Serafina. A queen of generosity," David cried. This triggered a small avalanche. 10,000, 25,000, the number crept up. 3 million, 3.2 million, 3.5 million, and then it stalled. The room grew quiet. The initial flurry of easy donations was over. They were still $1.5 million short. David Chen's smile was becoming strained. "Come on, ladies and gentlemen," he urged. "I know we can do this. Who has been saving their generosity for this very moment? Don't be shy." The room was silent. The sound of clinking silverware was suddenly deafening. Serafina, seeing her moment, grabbed the microphone from a nearby coordinator's table. "David, darling, it's just awful," she said into the mic, her voice echoing through the ballroom. The feedback screeched. "Serafina, please," David began, but she waved him off. "It's just tacky," Serafina continued, her eyes scanning the room, and then, as if drawn by a magnet, landing on table 42 in the back by the kitchens. "It's just so tacky," she repeated, "that some people come to these events, eat the food, drink the champagne, and just take up space. They just sit there like little grey mice." Here she stared directly at Alara, while the rest of us who care, are shouldering the burden. It's pathetic." The room was mortified. Arthur was halfway out of his chair, his face white with rage. "Alara, that's it. We're leaving now." But Alara didn't move. She was looking at the screen, not at Serafina, not at the people staring, at the numbers. 3,000. Goal, $5,000. She was still on her phone. Serafina had seen it earlier and mocked her. So rude, can't even pay attention. But Alara was paying attention. She took a sip of her water. She closed her small black notebook. She picked up her phone. Her fingers, long and elegant, began to type. "Alara," Arthur said, his voice raw. Alara didn't look up from her phone. Her thumb moved over the screen, pressing, swiping, confirming. "It's all right, Arthur," she said, her voice a low, calm vibration. "She's right about one thing." "What?" he asked, exasperated. Alara's thumb pressed the confirm button on her screen. A small transaction successful icon flashed. She finally looked up, her gaze cutting through the dim light of the ballroom past the jeering face of Serafina to the desperate face of the MC on the stage. "It is pathetic," she said. "They're not thinking nearly big enough. To understand what Alara Vance did next, you have to understand who she was. And no one in that ballroom, save Arthur, and even he only knew 90% of it, had any idea. Alara Vance was not Alara Vance. She was born Elara Vick, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a librarian in Omaha, Nebraska. She was a quiet child, a numbers girl. While other kids were playing house, Elara was learning Fortran. While they were at prom, she was winning national mathematics Olympiads. She went to Caltech on a full scholarship at 16. She was awkward. She didn't understand social cues. She understood binary. She saw the world not as a series of social interactions, but as a series of interconnected systems of inputs and outputs. And she saw very early on that the world systems were inefficient. In her dorm room at 19, she solved a problem that the brightest minds at Google, Amazon, and Microsoft were spending billions on predictive data compression. She wrote an algorithm. It was so elegant, so revolutionary, it could compress and stream massive data packets. Think entire genomes or high-definition video with almost zero latency. She called it ether. She didn't want to be a CEO. She didn't want to be famous. She hated meetings. She just wanted to build the next thing. So she did something smart. She licensed the core of Ether, not the platform itself, anonymously through a shell corporation she'd set up, with the help of a single, very discreet lawyer. The first check from a major defense contractor was for $50 million. She was 20 years old. She used that money to build the full Ether platform, a cloud computing logic core that was light years ahead of its competitors. By the time she was 22, every major tech company in the world was either using Ether's licensed tech or trying to buy the platform outright. When the Silicon Valley giants came knocking, they didn't find a young woman in a hoodie. They found a series of firewalled servers and a holding company registered in Delaware, Vance Aurelia Holdings. The Vance was for her grandmother. The Aurelia was for Marcus Aurelius, her favorite philosopher. When the bidding war for the majority stake of Ether concluded, Elara, now 23, was one of the wealthiest people on the planet. The final sale was for $22 billion. She had sold 90% of the company, but on one condition: she retained a 10% stake, a permanent and anonymous seat on the board, and final say over the Ether Foundation, the massive philanthropic arm she'd built into the company's bylaws. The world knew the name Ether. It was the invisible backbone of their smart homes, their streaming services, their stock markets. But the creator, the ghost in the machine, was unknown. The press called the anonymous founder EV and speculated it was a man. Elara, now with more money than God, did something truly radical. She vanished. She finished her degree. She moved to New York. And she went to the one place she had always felt safe, the library. She was working part-time for free as a researcher at the New York Public Library, just because she liked the quiet of the archives when she met Arthur Vance. He was a young, brilliant, and utterly broke history professor, researching a paper on the 12th century spice trade routes. He thought she was just another librarian. He was captivated by her mind, by the way she saw patterns he'd missed. He fell in love with the quiet girl who read Marcus Aurelius in the original Latin. When she finally told him 6 months into their relationship, he didn't believe her. Not until she took him to a small, unassuming brownstone in the village which she owned, and then showed him the other brownstone next door, which she also owned. She'd had the basements connected to, house her private server bank, and a full-scale analysis lab. So, he had said, sitting on her roof, looking at the stars, the $22 billion figure echoing in his head. The money. What do you do with it? Mostly I give it away, she'd said simply. But it's difficult. People behave strangely when they know. They stop being real. They want things. I don't like being wanted. I just like being. So you're Evie, he'd asked. I'm Elara, she'd said, and I would very much like it if you would just call me Elara. So he did. They got married at City Hall. They bought a comfortable but not ostentatious apartment on the Upper West Side. Arthur kept his job at the university. Elara kept her job as the anonymous head of Vance Aurelia Holdings, managing a philanthropic and investment portfolio that dwarfed the GDP of small countries. The Ether Foundation became her primary tool. It was a silent giant. It didn't put its name on buildings. It funded the research. It endowed scholarships, paid for clean water infrastructure in 50 countries, and anonymously covered the debts of failing hospitals. Elara Vance lived her life by a simple code: observe, calculate, and act. And sitting at table 42 in her champagne-soaked dress, being mocked by a woman who valued a pair of shoes at 10,000. Elara had finished her calculations. Serafina's total contribution across all her performative bids was $370,000. It was a lot of money. But Elara on her phone had just checked the public records of the Dubois-Huxley Foundation. It had assets of $500 million. Serafina's donation represented less than 1/10 of 1% of her foundation's holdings. It was by Elara's math, a rounding error. A pathetic, insulting rounding error given the need. Elara looked at the video of the children. She looked at the total stalled at $3.5 million. She looked at her husband's angry, protective face. She made her decision. Elara, I mean it. Let's go. Arthur was standing his hand out. The humiliation had become a physical weight, and he couldn't bear to see his wife, the most brilliant person he knew, subjected to it for one more second. Sit down, Arthur, Elara said. Her voice wasn't a request. It was a quiet, calm command that cut through his anger. He stared at her confused and slowly sat. What are you doing? He whispered. I'm solving a problem. Elara set her eyes on the stage. They have an insufficient funds issue. I have a liquidity surplus. It's a simple match. On her phone, she had just completed the transaction. A simple encrypted wire transfer from the Vance Aurelia Holdings primary philanthropic account to the Global Children's Relief Fund. The transfer was, by her standards, a modest one. She stood up. The entire table stared at her. Even the opera singer's cat looked up. Arthur's tuxedo jacket fell from her shoulders, pooling at her waist. She left it on the chair. She stood revealed in the slate-grey Givenchy dress, the dark, ugly stain of the pink champagne stark against the silk. She didn't try to hide it. She wore it like a battle scar. Elara, where are you going? Arthur asked, a note of panic in his voice. To talk to the event manager, she said. And she began to walk. The ballroom was still trapped in that awful posturing silence left by Serafina's speech. The MC David Chen was on stage, his face fixed in a rictus of a smile, desperately trying to think of a way to salvage the evening. Come on, people, he was saying weakly. I know we can. He trailed off, watching as Elara Vance walked out of the shadows of Siberia. She didn't walk down the main aisle. She walked along the perimeter by the service stations, moving with a quiet, unhurried purpose. People turned to look. First it was the waiters, then the tables nearest the edge. A new whisper began. Who is that? It's the professor's wife. The one Serafina spilled on. Look at her dress. How embarrassing. Serafina saw her. She was back at her front and center table, preening. She nudged Bay. "Oh, look!" Serafina hissed, loud enough for her table to hear. "The mouse is running, probably going to the bathroom to cry. So pathetic." But Alara wasn't going to the bathroom. She was heading for the side stage area, where a harassed-looking man in a headset, the event coordinator, was frantically talking to the lighting booth. Alara walked up to him. She waited patiently for him to finish yelling into his microphone. "And I don't care if the generator is—" He sensed someone standing next to him and turned, annoyed. "What, can't you see I'm—" He stopped. He looked at Alara. He saw the stained dress, the quiet face. He saw in his mind a 2,500 a plate guest who was probably lost or about to complain about the salmon. "Ma'am, the restrooms are to the left. If you have a complaint—" "I don't have a complaint," Alara said, her voice barely audible over the din. "I need to speak to Mr. Chen, the MC." The coordinator laughed, a short, sharp bark of stress. "Ma'am, he's in the middle of a show. We are $1.5 million short. I do not have time for—" "I know," Alara said. "That's why I need to speak to him. Or you can." "Speak to me about what?" he snapped. Alara held up her phone. On the screen was a bank confirmation, a wire transfer receipt from Vance Aurelia Holdings to the Global Children's Relief Fund. The coordinator squinted at it. He didn't understand. "Vance Aurelia. What is this?" "That is a donation," Alara said simply. "Great, fine," the coordinator said, waving his hand dismissively. "We'll add it to the—" "Wait." He looked again. His eyes scanned past the routing numbers, past the encryption codes, and landed on the amount. His face went white. The color drained from his skin, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. His hand, the one holding the clipboard, began to shake. Is this a joke?" he stammered. "I don't joke about money," Alara said. "This is—" He couldn't say the number. He just pointed at the screen, his finger trembling. "Yes," Alara said. "But I have a request. I would like the donation to be anonymous, from a friend, but I would like the amount to be reflected on the thermometer." "Can you do that?" The coordinator, whose name was Mark, just stared at her. He looked from the phone to her face. He saw the stained dress. He saw the simple pearl earrings. He saw the professor's mousy wife. And he saw the number on the phone. Phone screen. His brain simply broke. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking. That's more than—" "Can you do it or not?" Alara asked, not unkindly. "I understand if your system can't process a donation of that size from the floor. I can wait until tomorrow." "No." Mark yelped suddenly, terrified. This impossible magical number would vanish. "No, I can... Yes, I can do it." He fumbled for his headset, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "David," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "David, get ready. Get ready. I'm patching in a new pledge. A big one." On stage, David Chen heard the crackle in his ear. "A big one? How big, Mark?" "Did we get another 50K? Mark looked at Alara, who was just watching him with those calm, grey eyes. "No, David," Mark whispered into the mic, his gaze locked on the quiet woman in the stained dress. "You're not going to believe me." David Chen was dying on stage. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of failure. They were stalled at $3,500,000. It was a disaster. "Come on, New York," he pleaded, his TV host's smile frozen in place. One last push for the children. Silence. Then his earpiece crackled. It was Mark, his event coordinator, and he sounded like he was having a seizure. David, get ready. I'm patching in a new pledge. A big one. A big one. How big, Mark? David said, his voice hopeful. Did we get another 50K? There was a long, static-filled pause. Then Mark's voice came back, shaky and thin. No, David. You're not going to believe me. Just put it on the board, Mark. David snapped, his patience gone. Okay. Patching it to the main board, now. Behind David, the massive screen with the thermometer flickered. The total $3,500 blinked, and then it vanished. The number was replaced by a new donation entry, a new single-line item at the bottom of the pledge list. It read, Pledge, $30,000, $1,000, Donor Anonymous. Friend. For a full 3 seconds, the room did not react. The collective consciousness of the 800 people in the ballroom simply could not process the number. Their brains, attuned to $50,000 and $100,000, saw too many zeros. They thought it was a typo. Serafina at her table squinted. 30,000. Is that all? How cheap. No, Serafina. Marcus Thorne whispered, his face pale. Read it again. That's $30 million. The silence broke. It was not a gasp. It was a roar, a sound like a physical shock wave. 1,000 what? And, oh my God, all at once. The new total flashed on the screen. New total. $30,500,000. David Chen. The MC stared at the number. He turned to Mark in the wings, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Mark, still shaking, pointed. He wasn't trying to point. It was an involuntary gesture. He was just pointing at Alara, who was standing right next to him. David followed the line of Mark's trembling finger. It led him to the professor's wife, the mousy woman in the stained grey dress. The spotlight operator, confused and panicked, thought David was trying to point out the donor. He swiveled his light, and a hard, bright, white circle of light left David Chen and slammed onto Alara Vance, bathing her in an isolating, brutal glare. The entire 800-person ballroom went dead silent. Alara froze. This was not part of the plan. She hadn't calculated for this. She squinted into the light, her hand flying up to shield her eyes. And in that instant, everyone saw her. They saw the plain, dark hair. They saw the simple pearl earrings. And they saw, in horrifying high definition, the massive dark stain of champagne splashed across her chest. The whispers started again, but this time they weren't dismissive. They were sharp, confused, and electric. That's not possible. It's the professor's wife, 30 million. Her husband's a teacher. It's a mistake. It has to be a mistake. At the front table, Serafina Dubois Huxley was on her feet. Her face, a mask of perfectly applied makeup, was contorted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage and disbelief. "That's absurd!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Stop the show! It's a joke! She's no one. She's nothing." She was screaming at David, at the technicians, at the universe. "She's probably just taking credit." Serafina pointed a finger, her diamonds flashing. "She's a fraud. She's a pathetic little liar." The room was on a knife's edge. They wanted to believe Serafina. It made sense that Alara was a fraud. It made more sense than the idea that this quiet, unassuming woman in a ruined dress had just casually dropped $30 million. Alara, trapped in the spotlight, looked lost. She looked at Arthur, who was frozen at his table, his face a picture of stunned, terrified pride. She looked at Serafina, who was marching toward the stage, her red feathers practically vibrating with fury. "I demand to see the manager. This is an insult to the real donors." The entire gala was about to collapse into a brawl. And then a new voice cut through the chaos. "I can assure you, Ms. Dubois-Huxley, the donation is quite real." The voice was deep calm and carried the weight of absolute authority. The crowd parted. Striding from the VIP section, the tables reserved for the real money, the old guard, was Robert Chen. Robert Chen was not just the MC's uncle. He was the CEO of the bank that sponsored the gala. He was a man who didn't just attend galas. He approved them. His bank, the Bank of Metropolitan Trust, handled the accounts for half the people in this room. And as it happened, it was the primary domestic bank for the Global Children's Relief Fund. He walked past Serafina as if she were a piece of furniture and stopped at the edge of the stage, looking at Alara, who was still blinking in the spotlight. He gave a short, formal bow. "Mrs. Vance," he said, and his voice was picked up by the still live microphone on the podium. The entire room heard him. "I must apologize. I was not aware you were in attendance this evening. Had I known E.V. herself was gracing us, I would have seated you at my table." A new, more profound silence fell. "E.V. Who is E.V.? Serafina stopped. What did you call her?" Robert Chen turned to Serafina. His eyes were cold. "I called her Miss Dubois-Huxley by the name we at the bank use for our most valued clients. The principal of Vance Aurelia Holdings." The name Vance Aurelia rippled through the financial types in the room. It was a ghost, a behemoth, a holding company that moved markets without ever making a sound. But, Vance," Serafina stammered. "Her name is Vance." Robert Chen nodded. "Indeed, a coincidence, I'm sure." He turned back to Alara. "Mrs. Vance, your friend's donation has just been confirmed by our wire transfer division. It is to date the single largest private donation in the history of this fund. We are speechless." The spotlight on Alara was no longer an accusation. It was an anointment. She just nodded once to Mr. Chen. "It's for the children," she said, her voice a quiet whisper that miraculously the microphone seemed to catch. They deserve it." "No." Serafina's voice was a desperate wail. "I don't believe you. She's a fake." Arthur was at Alara's side now. He had crossed the ballroom floor in 10 long strides, and he put his arm around his wife's waist, pulling her out of the spotlight. "That's enough," he said to Robert Chen. "We're leaving." "Of course," Mr. Chen said, dipping his head again. But David Chen, the MC, who had been standing on stage with his jaw on the floor, suddenly got his voice back. The producer in his ear was screaming. "Wait! Wait!" David shouted, his voice high with adrenaline. "Mr. Chen! Mrs. Vance! We have another announcement." He was holding a new card just handed to him by the frantic coordinator, Mark. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice shaking with a new wild excitement. The $30 million donation. It has," He looked at the card, unable to believe the words. It has triggered a pre-arranged legacy match from... He paused. He looked right at Robert Chen, then at Elara. From the Ether Foundation. The name Ether hit the room like a bomb. Ether wasn't just money. Ether was everything. It was the invisible tech that ran their phones, their cars, their banks. The Ether Foundation, David read, his voice trembling, has a standing legacy match for the Global Children's Relief Fund. Any single donation over $25 million is matched, 5 to 1. He stopped. He did the math in his head. The room did the math with him. 5 to 1. 5 times 30 million. That's, David whispered, that's an additional $150 million. The sound that left the room was not a cheer. It was a single primal scream of disbelief. The thermometer on the screen exploded. The numbers spun like a slot machine, hitting the jackpot. $50, $1,000, $1,000, $100,000, $1,000, $1,000, $150,000, £1,000. It settled on a final impossible number. Grand total $183,500,000. In a matter of 90 seconds, Elara Vance had not just met the $5 million goal. She had funded the entire pediatric wing, endowed it for a century, and probably paid for the next 3 hospitals after that. The donation wasn't just more than every guest combined. It was more than the last decade of galas combined. Elara Vance looked at the number. She looked at the pandemonium. She looked at the flashing cameras, which were no longer on Serafina, but were burning into her. She turned to Arthur, her face pale, and whispered, "I think I overdid it." "No," Arthur said, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. He kissed her right there in front of the entire, screaming, baffled room. "I think you were just right." He wrapped his arm around her, and they turned to leave. The entire ballroom, all 800 people, parted for them like the Red Sea. The billionaires, the rock stars, the politicians. They stared. They moved out of the way. No one spoke. No one breathed. They walked past table 1, where Serafina Dubois Huxley stood frozen. Her face was a ruin. The champagne flute she had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. She didn't notice. She just watched the quiet woman in the stained grey dress. The woman who had just ended her reign, her world, her everything, with a quiet tap on a phone, walk out of the ballroom, leaving an echo of $180 million in her wake. The ride home was silent. The city lights were the same, but they felt different. Elara leaned her head against Arthur's shoulder, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her exhausted. "Ether," Arthur said softly, breaking the silence as the car idled at a red light. "You triggered the Ether match. You are Evie." Elara sighed. "Vance Aurelia is my personal fund. Ether is the corporate one. It was the most efficient way to maximize the capital. The match was already in place. I just activated it." "You activated it," Arthur repeated, and he started to laugh. It was a low, warm, bubbling laugh. "My God, Elara, you activated $150 million. It's not funny, Arthur. My anonymity is compromised." "My love," he said, turning to look at her, "your anonymity was a fortress. Tonight you just lowered the drawbridge, and you did it to stop a bully from hurting my feelings." "It wasn't," Elara started. "It wasn't just that. It was the children in the video, and—" she touched the still damp stain on her dress. "And it was the math. Serafina's donation was inefficient. It was an insult to the problem." The car pulled up to their brownstone. There were no paparazzi. Not yet. They were all still at the hotel trying to get a quote from a comatose Serafina. They went inside. Elara kicked off her simple heels. Arthur hung up his tux. Elara peeled off the ruined Givenchy dress and dropped it in the trash. She reappeared in an old, soft grey t-shirt, Arthur's, and a pair of flannel pants. She went into the kitchen and started to make tea. The next morning the world was on fire. The story was everywhere, not just on page 6. It was the front page above the fold headline in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The ghost of ether mystery, donor EV, unmasked at Vanguard Gala. The $180 million mouse. Serafina's folly. How New York's queen was dethroned by a quiet professor's wife. The articles were brutal. They had photos. A picture of Serafina, her face contorted in a sneer. A picture of Elara trapped in the spotlight, her dress stained. A picture of the final impossible number on the board. Serafina Dubois Huxley was in a word finished. The Queen was a joke. Her clique had evaporated. Marcus Thorne was already giving off-the-record quotes about how he always found her a bit crass. B. Croft was rumoured to be on a plane to Switzerland. The Dubois Huxley Foundation was under review by the IRS, triggered by an anonymous tip about her creative accounting. Arthur sat at their kitchen table, a simple oak table, reading the paper on his tablet. Elara was at the stove making pancakes. "It says here," Arthur said, "that Elara Vance, the reclusive EV of Ether, is poised to become the new quiet face of global philanthropy." "I don't want to be a face," Elara said, flipping a pancake. "I want to be a pair of hands." There was a knock at their door. Not a loud, demanding knock. A quiet, polite one. Arthur opened it. It was Robert Chen, the bank CEO, and a woman Arthur didn't recognize. "Professor Vance," Robert said, his voice hushed. "I apologize for the intrusion. This is Dr. Aris, the CEO of the Global Children's Relief Fund. We came to say thank you." Elara came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was wearing her flannel pants and Arthur's t-shirt. Dr. Aris, a woman who had seen war zones and famines, looked at Elara, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Vance." "Elara, what you did, you haven't just funded a wing. You have funded the end of 3 separate tropical diseases. You have saved, quite literally, millions of lives." Elara looked uncomfortable. It was the logical thing to do. Dr. Aris continued, "we want to name the new wing after you. The Elara Vance Center for—" "No." Elara said so quickly it was almost sharp. "Absolutely not." "But, no, I have one condition for the ether match." Robert Chen and Dr. Aris held their breath. "The new wing," Elara said, "and all the research it produces. You will name it after someone who actually deserves it. Someone who was a real architect of change." She paused. "You will call it the Dr. Madeleine Albright Center for Global Child Welfare." Robert Chen and Dr. Aris just stared at her. They had expected ego demands. They got homework. "That is," Dr. Aris said, A brilliant and fitting tribute. Of course. Good, Elara said. Now if you'll excuse me, the pancakes are burning. She nodded, turned and went back to the kitchen. Robert Chen looked at Arthur, his mind still reeling. She is, Arthur said, a proud, happy smile on his face. The quietest and loudest person I have ever met. Good day, gentlemen. He closed the door, leaving them on the stoop. He walked into the kitchen where Elara was plating the pancakes. The smell of maple syrup and butter filled the small, quiet apartment. Doctor, Madeleine Albright, Arthur asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She was practical, Elara murmured, leaning back into him. She got things done. I admire that. Arthur kissed the top of her head. I love you, Elara Vance. I love you too, Arthur, she said. Now eat. You have a 9 a.m. lecture on pre-Columbian monetary systems, and you can't be late. And in their small, quiet brownstone, as the city outside screamed her name, the most powerful woman in the world sat down and ate her pancakes. In the end, it wasn't the money that silenced the room. It was the realization that true power doesn't need to scream. Elara Vance didn't just write a check. She rewrote the rules of their entire world, all without raising her voice. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. What did you think of Elara's quiet revenge? Have you ever seen someone so underestimated prove everyone wrong? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We all love a story where the bully gets what they deserve. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic stories just like this one. Your support helps us create more content, and it means the world. We'll see you in the next story. They called her just a housewife. In the glittering world of her husband, Marcus Pierce, Elara was the invisible woman, the one who organized charity bake sales while he closed million-dollar deals. She was the simple, plain wife he tucked away the embarrassing secret to his sophisticated life. But at the Starlight Ball, the most exclusive event of the year, everyone was about to learn the truth. The woman they dismissed was richer than all of them combined. The man she loved was about to lose everything. This is the story of how Elara Pierce burned their world to the ground. The scent of old money and fresh-cut lilies always made Elara Pierce feel slightly nauseous. Her home, a sprawling, sterile white mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a testament to her husband's ambition, not her own. Every gleaming surface, every piece of cold modern art had been chosen by Marcus. Elara's only domain was the kitchen, which she genuinely loved, and her small, sun-filled study, where she organized fundraisers for the local women's shelter. Elara, are you even listening? Marcus barked, not looking up from his phone. He was knotting a silk Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back at him from the black marble of the fireplace. Elara flinched, pulling her focus from a spreadsheet detailing silent auction bids. Sorry, Marcus. The shelter gala is next week. I was just finalizing the numbers. Marcus sighed, a sound of profound theatrical exasperation. The shelter gala. Right. Listen, Elara, I need you to be serious for one night. The Starlight Ball is in 2 weeks. It's not your little bake sale. This is the event. I know, Marcus, the one hosted by the Ashfords, she said quietly. Not just hosted by them. Julian Ashford himself is rumored to be making an appearance. Do you understand what that means? He finally turned to her, his eyes cold. At 42, Marcus Pierce was a man sculpted by ambition. He was a senior vice president at Crestview Investments, a firm that was, to put it mildly, drowning. "It's important for your deal," Elara recited. "It's not a deal, Elara. It's the deal. Ashford Global is considering an acquisition of Crestview. Without it—" He didn't need to finish. Without it, the house of cards, this house, the cars, his reputation would collapse. "I need you to look presentable, not like a librarian. I need you to look like you belong." I don't belong, she thought. She hadn't belonged in this world for 10 years. She had been Elara Pierce for a decade. But before that, she had been someone else entirely. A ghost. I'll find something to wear," she murmured. "Good." He tapped his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've got to go. A dinner meeting with Serafina and the junior partners. We're finalizing the pitch for the Ashford board." Elara's stomach tightened at the name. Serafina Vance. The new, brilliant and stunningly beautiful junior executive in Marcus's division. The woman whose perfume, a heavy, expensive musk, had clung to his suit jackets for the past 6 months. "Oh. Well, have a good time." Elara said the words, tasting like ash. "Don't wait up." He was already out the door, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous hallway. Elara was left alone with the lilies and the spreadsheets. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the entryway. She saw a woman of 32, with kind eyes, simple brown hair, pulled back in a clip, and a plain cardigan. She saw just a housewife. But as she stared, another face stared back. A memory of a girl with fire in her eyes, standing on the deck of a yacht off the coast of Monaco. A girl who had been told she would one day rule the world. She shook the memory away. That girl was gone. That girl had run away to be normal, to be loved for herself. She had met Marcus, a charming, driven associate at a small firm. She had fallen in love with his energy, his promises of a simple, successful life. She had chosen this. She went back to her spreadsheets. The women's shelter needed 50,000 for a new wing. She would get it for them. This at least was real. This was her work. Later that night, long after midnight, Marcus's phone, synced to the tablet in the kitchen, buzzed with a new message. Elara, cleaning a wine glass, glanced over. "Serafina. He's bought it. The pitch is solid. He has no idea the Ashfords are planning to liquidate Crestview, not acquire it. He's just desperate enough to sign anything. And his pathetic little wife. He actually called her domestic. God, you're a good actor, Marcus." Elara dropped the glass. It didn't just break. It shattered, exploding across the quartz countertop. It wasn't the affair. She had suspected that. For months. It was the lie. It was the contempt. Pathetic little wife. Domestic. And liquidate. Marcus wasn't trying to save his company. He was trying to secure a golden parachute for himself, selling his partners and his wife down the river for a payout from the Ashford deal. She stared at the shattered glass, and for the first time in 10 years, the face of the girl on the yacht didn't fade away. It smiled, a cold, sharp, dangerous smile. The following week was a blur of forced smiles. Elara played the part of the supportive, oblivious wife. She cleaned the shattered glass, bandaged the small cut on her hand, and said nothing. She watched Marcus practice his pitch, a performance of desperation masquerading as confidence. He was a man acting out the final scene of his own tragedy, and he didn't even know it. The official invitation for the Starlight Ball arrived. It was not paper. It was a half-inch thick slab of engraved acrylic, delivered by a courier. The Ashford family crest, a golden griffin clutching a key, was embossed at the top. "Look at this, Elara," Marcus said, holding it up to the light. "This is it, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the entire Egyptian wing. They say the Ashfords donate 8 figures just to close the museum for the night." "It's impressive," Elara said, her voice carefully neutral. She knew the crest. As a child, she'd had a signet ring with the same griffin. She'd thrown it into the Seine the day she ran away. "Impressive isn't the word," Marcus scoffed. "It's power, and I need you to look the part. I mean it, Elara." He pulled a black credit card from his wallet. Not his usual one, but a sleek, heavy card with no name, only a number. "This is the corporate emergency card. Go to Bergdorf's. Go to Saks. I don't care. Buy a dress. Buy jewelry. Just, for God's sake, get your hair done. Don't look like you're going to a PTA meeting." The insult which would have stung her a week ago now felt clinical. She took the card. "All right, Marcus. I'll take care of it." "Good. Serafina is helping me with the final presentation. She actually knows some of the junior board members. She knows how this world works. She knows how you work," Elara thought. The next day, Elara went into Manhattan. But she didn't go to Bergdorf's. She walked down Fifth Avenue, feeling the city's energy, a current she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a decade. She passed the grand fortress-like building that was the U.S. headquarters of Ashford Global. A massive, polished brass A hung over the granite archway. She paused, looking at her faint reflection in the brass. She didn't go inside. Not yet. Instead, she went to a small, unassuming coffee shop in the West Village, one she used to frequent. She ordered a black coffee and sat. She was waiting. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled conference room in Midtown, Serafina. Vance was lounging on Marcus's desk, one Louboutin heel swinging lazily. She actually took the credit card. Serafina laughed, a sound like ice cubes in a glass. "God, she's so predictable. What do you think she'll buy?" "Something beige, I bet. Something with a sensible neckline." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, massaging his temples, "as long as she doesn't embarrass me in front of the Ashfords." "Oh, sweetie, she's going to embarrass you." Serafina purred, sliding off the desk, and walking behind him, her hands kneading his shoulders. "But that's the point, isn't it? When you finally leave her after your big payday, everyone will understand. They'll say, 'Well, look at her.' Can you blame him? The deal first, Sarah. Then we can talk about that." "The deal," Serafina agreed. "I've double-checked the liquidation clauses. The moment Julian Ashford's representative signs the holding company, transfers the funds to your private account in Zurich. Crestview's other partners will be locked in a bankruptcy proceeding for years. But you'll be on a beach with me. And what about old man Ashford? You're sure he won't be there? You're sure it's just his lawyers? Julian Ashford hasn't been seen in public in 5 years, Marcus. He's a recluse, a ghost. He's probably hooked up to a machine somewhere. His lackeys run everything. And those lackeys, my darling, are very, very predictable." Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes, as Serafina's fingers brushed his neck. "Good, because in 1 week I'll be free." Across town, Elara's phone vibrated. A text message with a single word, "Here." Elara stood up, leaving her coffee untouched. She walked out of the shop and into a black Rolls-Royce that had pulled silently to the curb. The door was opened by a man in a dark suit. "It's good to see you, Miss Elara," the man said, his voice thick with a quiet, respectful relief. "It's good to see you too, Benjamin," she said. The man was Benjamin Reed, chief counsel for the Ashford family, and the one person on earth who knew her as anything other than Mrs. Pierce. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was silent, the chaos of New York City reduced to a muted film outside the tinted windows. It smelled of old leather and his grandfather's faint, familiar scent of cedar. "How is he?" Elara asked, her voice tight. It was the first question she had asked in 10 years. Benjamin Reed, a man whose face was a road map of loyalty and concern, turned to her. "He is fading, Miss Elara. The doctors say it is a matter of months, perhaps only weeks. He has one last wish." "To see me," Elara whispered, looking down at her hands. Hands that baked bread and weeded gardens, not hands that signed billion-dollar contracts. "To make you safe," Benjamin corrected gently. "To restore what is yours. He has never stopped searching for you, not for one day. When you vanished from Paris, he nearly tore the world apart." "I know," she said, guilt and old anger mixing into a bitter cocktail. "I couldn't breathe, Ben. The expectations, the Ashford name. It was a golden cage. The arranged marriage he was planning. I would have rather died." "He knows that now," Ben said. "He's an old man, Elara. He's not the tyrant you fled. He's just a grandfather who wants to know his only heir is safe before he goes." Elara processed this. "How did you find me? We've had leads for years. We knew you were in the US, but you were clever. New name, no credit cash jobs for the first few years. And then you married Marcus Pierce." Ben's face darkened. "We've been monitoring him for 6 months, ever since his firm Crestview opened negotiations for the Ashford Global acquisition." Elara's blood ran cold. You knew he was trying to make this deal." "Yes, we were perplexed. He was negotiating against your interests, using his marriage to you, which he clearly doesn't understand, as a minor social leverage point. But then 6 weeks ago, the nature of the deal changed. He began colluding with her, Miss Serafina Vance." "He's not being acquired, is he?" Elara asked, her voice flat. "No, Miss Elara." Ben said, his tone grave. "He is being played. Ms. Vance is colluding with a rival firm, Vanguard Capital. They convinced her that Ashford Global intended to liquidate Crestview. They've fed her false information. She in turn believes she is helping Marcus steal a golden parachute. So what's the real deal? There isn't one. Ashford Global was never going to acquire Crestview. The firm is leveraged to the point of absurdity. Your grandfather merely allowed the negotiations to continue, to keep an eye on Mr. Pierce, to see what kind of man his granddaughter had married." Elara leaned her head against the cool glass. "And now he knows?" "He does," Ben said, "and he is displeased." The car wasn't heading back to Greenwich. It was heading toward a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. "Where are we going?" "To see your grandfather. He is at the estate in the Adirondacks. He wants to see you before the ball." Ben paused. "Elara, the Starlight Ball is not just a party this year. It is your introduction. Your grandfather plans to formally announce his retirement and name you as his successor, as the matriarch and CEO of Ashford Global." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. CEO. Matriarch. These were the words she had fled. "I can't, Ben. I'm a housewife. I organize bake sales. I haven't looked at a balance sheet in a decade. Benjamin Reed smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen. "Miss Elara, you were educated at MIT and INSEAD. You speak 4 languages. You interned at the Rothschild Bank in Zurich. You single-handedly restructured your boarding school's endowment fund at the age of 17. The only reason you are a housewife is because you are brilliant enough to act like one. Your grandfather knows this. I know this. The only person you've managed to fool, it seems, is your husband." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a simple, elegant file. "This is the dossier on Marcus Pierce, and Miss Vance, and Vanguard Capital. Everything. Your grandfather believed you might want to read it, to understand the game before you play your hand." Elara opened the file. The first page was a wire transfer confirmation, from Marcus's account to a private account in Serafina's name. The second was a transcript of the phone call from last night. She read. And as she read, the housewife, Elara Pierce, the woman who worried about PTA meetings and beige dresses, quietly and completely evaporated. The woman who was left, she was an Ashford, and she was furious. The Ashford estate in the Adirondacks was not a house. It was a territory. A sprawling, Gilded Age great camp, built of massive timbers and local stone. It sat on its own private lake, surrounded by tens of thousands of acres of pristine forest. The camp was named Griffin's Ledge. It was where Elara had spent her summers as a child, before her parents' death in a plane crash had made her the sole heir. The helicopter landed on a wide granite pad. Benjamin Reed escorted her to the main lodge. Julian Ashford was waiting for her on the porch, wrapped in a blanket in a large wheelchair, an oxygen tube clipped discreetly to his nose. He was thinner than she remembered his legendary steel-grey eyes, now clouded with age and illness. But when he saw her, they cleared. "Elara." He breathed, his voice a dry rustle. He held out a trembling hand. Elara rushed to him, dropping to her knees and taking his frail hand in hers. The tears she had held back for a week, for a decade, finally came. "Grandfather, I'm so sorry." "Hush, child," he whispered, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "It is I who am sorry. I drove you away. I saw you as a successor, not as a granddaughter. I tried to forge you into a weapon. I forgot to just love you. Can you forgive an old fool? There's nothing to forgive." She wept. "I was just so lost." "You were not lost," he said, his voice gaining a flicker of its old strength. "You were in hiding. Now, it is time to come home." They sat for hours. She told him about her small life, about the joy she found in the shelter, in gardening, in living without a security detail. He in turn told her about the company, how it had grown, but how it lacked heart. "It is a vast, powerful machine, Elara," he said, looking out at the lake. "But it has no soul. It needs you. The Ashford Foundation. Your mother started it. It's been stagnant. You with your shelter. You understand things I never did." Then they talked about Marcus. "He's a fool," Julian stated, his voice flat. "A greedy, short-sighted, arrogant fool. And he has my granddaughter's name in his mouth. He doesn't know grandfather. He thinks I'm nobody. He calls me just a housewife." Julian Ashford's eyes hardened. "That is a mistake he will only make once. Benjamin has explained the situation. The ball. The announcement. Are you ready for this, Elara? Once you step into that light, you can never go back to the shadows." Elara thought of the text message from Serafina. She thought of Marcus's contempt. She thought of the lie. "He's not just a fool, grandfather," Elara said, her voice turning cold. "He's a thief. He's colluding with Serafina Vance to defraud his own company and escape with a payout. And she is colluding with Vanguard Capital to sabotage the Ashford name." Julian nodded slowly. "A tangled web." "I'm not just going to announce my succession," Elara said, standing up. "I'm going to clean house. My house, my company's house, and my husband's." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Julian Ashford's face. "There you are," he whispered. "There's the Ashford blood." "Ben," Elara called, turning to the lawyer who stood discreetly by the door. "I need you to do several things. First, I want you to freeze the Zurich account Marcus Pierce opened. Use our Swiss banking connections. I want it frozen 1 hour before the Starlight Ball begins." Ben nodded, already taking notes. "Second, I want you to call the SEC and prepare a whistleblower report on Vanguard Capital for stock manipulation using Ms. Vance as an unregistered agent. Time the submission for 900 p.m., the night of the ball. Consider it done. Third, I need a dress." Ben looked up confused. "A dress, Miss Elara?" "Marcus gave me his corporate card to buy a dress at Bergdorf's," she said, a wicked glint in her eye. "I want to use it. I want to buy the most obscenely expensive, garish, awful dress they have. Something beige and sensible." Ben looked utterly bewildered, but Julian Ashford burst into a rare, rumbling laugh. "And," Elara continued, "I want my dress, the one Mother commissioned for my 21st birthday, the Dior gown. Is it still in the vault?" "Of course, miss," Ben said. "Have it flown to New York, and call my mother's team, the stylist, the hair, the makeup, and Harry Winston. Tell them the Griffin is returning." Elara spent 2 more days with her grandfather, poring over the company's financials, absorbing the last 10 years of business. It was like a dormant language she suddenly remembered how to speak. She wasn't just a housewife. She was a genius. And she had been bored for a very, very long time. When she returned to the sterile Greenwich house, Marcus was there fuming. "Where the hell have you been?" he yelled. "I've been calling you for 2 days." Elara walked past him, carrying a large, obnoxious Bergdorf Goodman bag. "I was at a spa," she said calmly. "You told me to get presentable. I got presentable. A 2-day spa trip. Without telling me the ball is tomorrow night. Elara, I'm aware." She pulled the dress from the bag and held it up. It was a monstrosity. A high-necked, long-sleeved, shapeless sack of a dress in the most depressing shade of beige. Marcus stared at it in horror. "What is that?" "It's Chanel," she lied. "The saleswoman said it was very sophisticated. It cost $20,000. Marcus's eye twitched, but he'd seen the charge on his corporate card. 20,000. For that, it's fine. Whatever. Just do something with your hair. Please, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm staying in the city tonight with Serafina to do final prep." "Of course, dear," Elara said, her smile perfectly sweet. "You go focus on your deal. I'll just see you at the museum." He slammed the door. Elara looked at the beige dress, then tossed it into the fireplace. "It's not even Chanel," she muttered. She hadn't even gone to the store. She'd had Ben's assistant buy it. The real dress was already hanging in her closet. The day of the Starlight Ball was electric. New York City hummed with the anticipation of it. The New York Times and Vogue had both run features on the event, calling it the coronation of the year, though no one understood why. The rumor was that Ashford Global was announcing a new massive philanthropic initiative. In a suite at the Pierre Hotel, Marcus Pierce was adjusting his tuxedo. Serafina Vance, in a crimson backless gown, was sipping champagne. "Tonight's the night," she toasted, clinking his glass. "By midnight you'll be a very rich man, and I'll be the woman who made it happen." "To us," Marcus said, his nerves fraying. "You're sure the transfer will go through? The moment the Ashford representative signs the acquisition papers, the liquidation clause is triggered. The funds route through 3 shell corporations and land in Zurich. By the time the SEC even smells a rat, we'll be in Turks and Caicos." "What about Elara?" Marcus asked, a flicker of something. Not guilt, but annoyance. "What about her?" Serafina scoffed. "She'll be humiliated, broke and divorced. She'll go back to whatever suburban hole she crawled out of. She'll be fine. She's a housewife, Marcus. They're resilient." Marcus nodded, straightening his bow tie. "You're right. She'll be fine." He looked at his watch, 6:00 p.m. "The car is here. Let's go make our entrance." Across town, in a different kind of silence, Elara was undergoing her own transformation. The house in Greenwich was empty, save for a team of people who moved with quiet, practiced efficiency. This was the Ashford team, the people who had served her mother. Her hair, once a simple brown, was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant, powerful waves that fell over one shoulder. Her makeup was flawless, not heavy, but definitive. Her eyes, once soft and kind, were now sharp and assessing, lined in a subtle black. She was not the woman who had left this house. Then she put on the dress. It was not a dress. It was armor. A custom Christian Dior gown commissioned a decade ago and held in storage, it was timeless. It was made of a deep sapphire blue velvet that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with an aristocratic severity, long sleeves, a high collar. But it was fitted perfectly to her body, hinting at a strength Marcus had never bothered to see. And then the jewelry. From a Harry Winston velvet case, Benjamin Reed lifted the Ashford necklace, a staggering river-like cascade of blue and white diamonds, culminating in the griffin's heart, a flawless 100-carat blue diamond. "Your mother wore this," Ben said quietly. Elara nodded, her throat tight. She fastened the matching diamond earrings. She was no longer Elara Pierce. She was Elara Ashford. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the private security team Ben had assigned to her. "Security Mr. Pierce and Miss Vance have arrived at the Met. They are on the main floor." Elara stood. "It's time." "One more thing, miss," Ben said. He held out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was the signet ring she had thrown into the Seine. The gold griffin. "How?" "Your grandfather had divers search for it for 6 months. He always knew you'd come back." Elara slid the ring onto her right pinky finger. It was a perfect fit. "Let's go," she said. Back at the museum, Marcus and Serafina were working the room. The Egyptian wing of the Met was breathtaking, the Temple of Dendur, serving as a backdrop. Waiters offered champagne and caviar. "There," Marcus whispered, nodding toward a group of men in severe suits. "That's the Ashford board. That's it, Sarah. That's our target." "Easy, darling," Serafina said, smoothing his lapel. "Let them come to us. We're the hot new commodity." As they mingled, a few of Marcus's colleagues from Crestview approached, their faces pale with worry. "Marcus," one of them, a man named David, said nervously. "My accounts are frozen. All of them. My corporate and my personal. Is something wrong with the firm?" Marcus felt a jolt of panic. What no? It's probably just a security glitch. The network gets jumpy before a big merger. But relax, David. Serafina cut in her smile, dazzlingly fake. Have some champagne. Tonight is a celebration. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He looked at it. A fraud alert from his bank in Zurich. Account frozen. Pending international inquiry. No, he whispered. No. Marcus, what is it? Serafina said, her smile faltering. The account. It's frozen. They froze the account. What? Serafina's face went white. They can't. How did they know? I don't know. You, she hissed, grabbing his arm. You did something stupid. You told someone. Did you tell your wife? What no? She's too stupid to even understand. A Zurich account. Then who? As panic began to grip them, a sudden profound hush fell over the 3,000-strong crowd. The music stopped. The ambient chatter died. All eyes turned to the grand staircase. The silence in the great hall was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Marcus and Serafina, frozen in their private spiral of panic, turned with the rest of the crowd to see what had caused the interruption. On the landing of the grand staircase stood Julian Ashford. This alone was enough to cause a sensation. The man was a myth, a ghost. He hadn't been seen in public since the 2008 financial crisis. He was standing, albeit leaning heavily on a cane, not in the wheelchair they'd all assumed he was confined to. He looked frail, but his eyes, magnified by his glasses, swept the room with an ancient, undeniable authority. Beside him stood Benjamin Reed. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice boomed surprisingly strong, amplified by the museum's acoustics. Thank you for joining me. Cameras flashed. The press, held back at the edges of the room, went into a frenzy. He's here. Marcus whispered, his panic momentarily forgotten, replaced by a greedy awe. He's actually here. This is bigger than we thought. Shut up, Marcus. Serafina snapped her eyes, darting around, looking for an exit. Something is wrong. For 50 years, Julian continued, I have been the steward of Ashford Global. I built it from my father's small shipping company into the entity it is today. But time as it must has come for me. A collective gasp. Tonight I am here to do two things. First, to announce my immediate retirement as chairman and CEO. The room exploded in murmurs. This was the biggest news in the financial world in a decade. Who would take over the board was competent, but there was no clear successor. And second, Julian raised his hand, silencing the crowd once more. I am here to introduce the new head of the Ashford family, the new matriarch of our legacy, and the new chairwoman and CEO of Ashford Global. Marcus looked at Serafina, giddy. This is it. They're announcing the new internal structure. This is when they'll sign the acquisition. My successor, Julian said, his voice softening, is the one person who has always held the key to its future. The one person I trust to lead it with not only a brilliant mind, but with the heart it has so desperately lacked. He turned, holding his hand out toward the top of the stairs, which had been in shadow. Please, welcome my granddaughter. A figure stepped from the darkness. It was not a junior executive. It was not a faceless board member. It was Alara. She descended the stairs not as a housewife, but as a queen. The sapphire dress, seemed to pull all the light in the room onto her. The griffin's heart, diamond at her throat, flashed with a cold blue fire. Her gaze was not nervous or shy. It was level assessing and utterly, terrifyingly cold. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at only one person. Marcus. The sound Marcus Pierce made was not a word. It was a strangled biological noise, the sound of a man's entire reality collapsing in on him. He dropped his champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, but no one heard it over the thunder of 1,000 camera flashes. Serafina Vance was frozen. Her perfectly painted red lips were parted in a silent O of horror. Her mind, usually so quick, so calculating, simply could not process what she was seeing. The mousy beige woman she had mocked was wearing the Ashford diamonds. That's not, Serafina stammered. That's impossible. Elara reached the bottom of the stairs. She walked past the stunned board members, past the billionaires and politicians, and stood beside her grandfather. She kissed his cheek, then turned to the microphone Benjamin Reed held for her. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces, and then her eyes landed on Marcus and Serafina. She gave them a small, tight smile. It did not reach her eyes. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was clear, crisp, and carried the effortless authority of someone who has never had to raise it to be heard. It was not the voice of the woman who organized bake sales. "My name," she said, her gaze locking with Marcus's, "is Elara Ashford. For 10 years, many of you knew me, if you knew me at all, as Elara Pierce, just a housewife." She let the words hang in the air, a public accusation. The crowd shifted, sensing the blood in the water. "I chose that life," Elara continued, "to see if I could live and be loved for who I was, not for what I was worth. I wanted a normal life. I wanted to build something real." She paused. "It was an informative experiment." "Elara." Marcus took a step forward, his hand outstretched, a ghastly, pleading smile on his face. "Darling, what is this? This is a joke, right? A surprise?" Elara looked at him. The entire room watched as the new CEO of Ashford Global regarded the man. It was the look a biologist might give a specimen under a microscope. "A surprise." "Yes, I suppose it is, Marcus." She turned her gaze to Serafina. "And for you too, Miss Vance." Serafina's phone buzzed. And again. And again. She looked down. News alerts. SEC launches formal investigation into Vanguard Capital. CITES stock manipulation. Swiss authorities freeze Zurich accounts linked to Crestview investments. Serafina looked up, her face ashen, true animalistic fear in her eyes. "As my first act as CEO," Elara said into the microphone, her voice resonating with cold power, "Ashford Global is formally cancelling all negotiations with Crestview investments, effective immediately." "No!" Marcus shouted, lunging forward. "No, you can't." "We have a deal, Elara, please. We can talk about this." 2 Ashford security guards who had materialized silently from the crowd grabbed Marcus by the arms. "Furthermore," Elara said, her voice cutting through his protests, "Ashford Global is filing a civil suit against Mr. Marcus Pierce and Ms. Serafina Vance for conspiracy to defraud. And on a personal note," she looked directly at Marcus as he struggled against the guards, "Mr. Pierce, you referred to me as your pathetic little wife. You conspired to sell my company's assets, Assets you didn't even know were mine to fund a new life with your mistress. You told me to buy a dress and look the part. Well, here I am." She gestured to her gown. "This is a Dior. The necklace is Harry Winston. The company is mine." She turned to the guards. "He is no longer my husband. He is no longer an employee of any Ashford interest. He is in fact a criminal. Please escort him from my property." "Elara." "No, you can't do this to me." Marcus roared, his civilized mask completely gone, revealing the desperate, terrified creature beneath. "I love you, Elara." The guards dragged him out of the Temple of Dendur, his screams echoing off the ancient stone. The room was silent. Elara then turned her cool gaze to Seraphina, who was shaking, cornered. "Miss Vance," Elara said, "your ambition is—" "Noted. You're fired. And I'd advise your consulting firm to review its ethics clause. Oh, and one more thing. The deal you thought you had with Vanguard Capital, it was a fake. You were colluding with them to defraud me. And they were colluding with someone else to defraud you. You were a pawn, Miss Vance. And now you're a liability." Seraphina looked as if she'd been slapped. She turned and fled. Pushing through the crowd, her crimson dress a smear of color as she ran in humiliation. Elara watched them both go, her face impassive. She then turned back to the microphone and the stunned, silent audience. "My apologies for the housekeeping," she said. She then smiled a real warm smile that transformed her face. "Now, shall we talk about the future of the Ashford Foundation?" The crowd, after a beat of stunned silence, erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. The fallout was instantaneous. By 9:30 p.m., the heiress in hiding was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By 10:00 p.m., stock futures for Vanguard Capital had plummeted into the red. By 11:00 p.m., Marcus Pierce was in a holding cell booked for questioning. Seraphina Vance was nowhere to be found. She had reportedly gone straight to her lawyer's office, her phone turned off. But Elara was not focused on the past. She was focused on the future. After her speech, a brilliant, passionate and detailed plan to refocus the $20 billion Ashford Foundation on microloans for women-owned businesses and shelters. Her bake sale work scaled globally. She had set the financial world on fire. She spent the next 2 hours in a whirlwind of conversations, not with fawning socialites, but with global leaders, bank presidents, and philanthropic titans. "Your mother would be so proud," said an elderly duchess, a close friend of her mother's. "She always said you were the cleverest of all." "A brilliant move, Ms. Ashford," said the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. "Restructuring the foundation's debt will free up 30% more capital. I'll have my team on a call with yours tomorrow." Elara moved through the room with a grace and confidence that felt to her like slipping back into her own skin. She wasn't acting. She wasn't Elara Pierce, or even Elara Ashford. She was, for the first time, simply Elara. She found her grandfather by the reflecting pool, watching the scene, a look of profound peace on his face. "You've started a war, child," he said, his voice proud. "I've finished one, grandfather," she corrected. "What they did, it was an infection. I just removed it." "And Marcus," Elara's face hardened for a moment, "he gets exactly what he's entitled to. Our prenuptial agreement, the one he insisted on, states that in the event of a divorce, all assets are split 50-50. Julian looked confused. "But child, that means—" "It means," Elara said, "he gets 50% of his assets, which as of 9:00 p.m. tonight are less than 0. His stock options are worthless. His bank accounts are frozen. The house in Greenwich is in a trust under my maiden name. He gets half of his credit card debt, and I, in turn, will keep 100% of the Ashford Trust, which I never disclosed to him. Julian Ashford stared at her. You planned this. The prenup. You knew. I hoped, grandfather. I hoped I'd married a man who loved me. But I am an Ashford. I planned for the man he truly was. Her phone, a new one, issued by Ben, buzzed. It was her lawyer. Ms. Ashford, Marcus Pierce is requesting to see you. He's at the 19th precinct. He's rambling, saying it's all a terrible misunderstanding. He's asking for you to post his bail. Elara looked at the phone, then at her grandfather. She smiled. Tell him, she said, to ask his mistress. She hung up and turned back to the party. The next morning, Elara did not wake up in the Greenwich house. She was in her family's penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a place that had been kept exactly as her mother had left it. She woke at 5:00 a.m. as she always did. But instead of making coffee for an ungrateful husband, she was met by her new chief of staff. By 6:00 a.m. she was in the main Ashford Global boardroom on the 80th floor, the city lights still twinkling below her. The board was assembled the same men who had been stunned into silence last night. Good morning, gentlemen, Elara said, taking her seat at the head of the massive obsidian table, her grandfather's seat. I'm sure you've all read the preliminary reports from PricewaterhouseCoopers. The room was tense. They had expected a socialite. They were facing a strategist. The Vanguard capital leak was effective, said one of the older board members, a man named Henderson. But it's cost us. The stock is volatile. It's not a leak, Mr. Henderson, Elara said, opening her laptop. It's a controlled burn. We've exposed a competitor's deep-seated corruption. We took a 3% dip in pre-market trading. They've lost 60% of their value. I call that a win. She projected a file onto the main screen. This is not our problem. This is. The screen filled with a list of stagnant, underperforming assets. We have $4 billion tied up in old-world fossil fuels and speculative real estate. It's lazy. It's my grandfather's way. No offense, Julian, she said, nodding to her grandfather who was attending via a video link from the penthouse, looking happier than he had in years. None taken child. It was lazy. As of today, Elara announced, we are divesting, all of it. We are liquidating these assets and redirecting the full $4 billion into our new Ashford Future Division, Renewable Energy Biotech and AI Ethics. We are no longer a 20th century company. We are a 21st century one. Any questions? The board was silent, stunned by the sheer scale and speed of her move. This was not a transition. It was a revolution. Henderson stammered. This will take months, years even, to untangle. It will take 6 weeks, Elara said. I've already modeled the divestment. The plan is on your tablets. I expect the first phase to be executed by Monday. She stood up. I'm not here to be a placeholder. I'm not here to be a figurehead. I'm here to work. My housewife days taught me one thing: efficiency. I ran a $5 million charity on a $50,000 budget. Imagine what I can do with $50 billion. She looked at every single person in the eyes. You are either with me or you are in my way. Decide. You have until the end of the day. She walked out of the boardroom, leaving a group of the most powerful men in New York, utterly speechless. While Elara was remaking a global empire, Marcus Pierce was sitting in a bare white interrogation room. His tuxedo was rumpled, his hair a mess. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving him a shaking, terrified wreck. "I don't understand," he kept repeating to the detective. "You have to call her. She's my wife, Elara Ashford." "It's a mistake, Mr. Pierce," the detective said, sipping his coffee. "Your wife is currently in a board meeting. Her lawyer, however, has been very helpful." The door opened, and a tired-looking public defender walked in. "Mr. Pierce, I'm your court-appointed attorney." "Court-appointed?" Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I'm worth millions. I don't need a public defender. Call my lawyer. Call Bill." "We did," the defender said, sitting down. "His firm dropped you as a client this morning, citing irreconcilable conflicts of interest. Apparently they also work for Ashford Global." Marcus's face fell. "What, no?" "Listen, Marcus, you're in a lot of trouble. The SEC has you dead to rights on securities fraud. The Swiss have frozen your accounts. And your wife, well, she's filed for divorce." "Divorce? No, she can't. She can. And she has. She's also provided the DA with a very thorough dossier. Texts, bank records, recorded phone calls. This one's from a Serafina V." The defender read from a paper. "He's just desperate enough to sign anything. And his pathetic little wife, he actually called her domestic." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. She knew. She knew everything." "It appears so," the lawyer said. "And Miss Vance, she's been granted immunity in exchange for her full testimony against you, and Vanguard Capital." That witch," Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "She set me up." "Looks like a lot of people set you up, Marcus," the lawyer said. "Right now your only play is a plea bargain. With this much evidence they're going to bury you." Marcus Pierce, the man who had dismissed his wife as just a housewife, finally understood. He had never been the player. He had never even been on the board. He was the piece, and he had just been swept off it. He put his head in his hands, the reality of his arrogance crashing down on him. He was a man with nothing. No job, no money, no mistress, and a wife who was it, turned out one of the most powerful women in the world. And she hated him. 3 months later, the headline on Forbes magazine read, "The Ashford Revolution: How Elara Ashford Added $30 billion to her empire by thinking like a housewife." The article detailed her domestic approach. She cut waste. She focused on community. The Ashford Foundation, she cleaned house, firing 40% of the redundant, overpaid C-suite executives, and she invested in the home, her $4 billion pivot to sustainable energy, which was already posting record returns. Elara herself was not in the penthouse. She was in the newly renovated wing of the Haven Women's Shelter, the one her little charity gala had been raising money for. After the ball, she had personally written a check to complete the funding, and then had the Ashford Foundation match it, building a new state-of-the-art facility. She was not wearing Dior. She was in jeans and a simple sweater, painting a wall. "You know," said Maria, the shelter director, and her friend, handing her a roller. "You're a lot more famous than the last time you were here. I had to shoo away 3 paparazzi." "They'll get bored," Elara laughed, painting a long, even stroke of pale blue. "They're waiting for me to go to a club or crash a car. They don't find philanthropic manual labor very exciting." "Well, we're glad to have you. The Elara Ashford Center for Economic Independence sounds a lot better than the new wing." "It's just a name, Maria." "It's a symbol," Maria said, stopping. You know, for years you'd come here, so quiet, so efficient. You were the best organizer we ever had. But there was always a sadness to you. A wall. That wall is gone. You seem happy. Elara stopped painting and looked at her friend. I am. For 10 years I tried to be someone I wasn't. I hid. I thought being just a housewife was a disguise. But I wasn't pretending. I loved this work. I loved organizing. I loved a balanced budget. I loved making something out of nothing. I was doing it on the wrong scale. She looked around the beautiful, bright room where women would soon be learning to kyat and build businesses. Marcus thought housewife was an insult. He thought it meant stupid. He didn't realize that running a home, running a charity, running a life, that's the most difficult CEO job in the world. He didn't just underestimate me, Elara Ashford. He underestimated all of us. A young associate from her office poked her head in. Ms. Ashford, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Henderson is on the line. The final divestment is complete. Elara nodded. Tell him I'll be there in an hour, and tell the jet to be ready. I'm flying to the new solar plant in Arizona tonight. She turned back to Maria, smiling. One last wall. One last wall. 1 year later. Julian Ashford sat on the porch at Griffin's Ledge, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and purple. He was weaker, but he was still here. He had held on. He heard footsteps and smiled as Elara sat beside him, wrapping a blanket over his legs. You made it, he whispered. I told you I'd be here for the weekend, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. The board can survive without me for 48 hours. How is everything? Marcus Pierce, she said, her voice neutral, was sentenced to 8 years for fraud. He'll be out in 4 with good behavior. And Ms. Vance, she's working as a consultant in Dubai. She'll never work in the US or Europe again. She's irrelevant. Good. He sighed, a sound of contentment. And the company? We just broke ground on the first fully carbon-neutral shipping fleet. The Ashford Foundation is now a global leader in women's economic empowerment. And I finally sold the Greenwich House. I gave the proceeds to the Haven shelter. You did good, child. You did what I never could. You gave the name a soul. They sat in silence watching the stars appear. Elara was no longer a housewife, not really. She was a CEO, a philanthropist, a global power. But she still, on quiet weekends, baked her grandfather's favorite bread. She still balanced her own checkbook. She had not shed her housewife skin. She had simply shown the world that the skills of a housewife scaled up were the skills that could run the world. She had been called just a housewife as an insult, but she had turned it into a title of power, resilience, and quiet, unassailable strength. The woman who had been dismissed was now the woman who could not be ignored, and she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you for listening to this story of karma revenge and the power of a woman who was dangerously underestimated. We've all felt invisible at times, dismissed by people who are too arrogant to see our true worth. Elara's story is a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. They're not just listening, they're planning. What did you think of Marcus's ultimate downfall? Was it an ending you saw coming? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you love stories where the underdog gets their ultimate revenge, please hit that Like button, share this video with someone who needs a good story, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss the drama we have coming up next. Thanks for watching.